The sun was a hammer, and Willow Evans was the nail. She felt it beat down on her head as the schoolhouse steps began to melt before her eyes. For weeks, she'd been running on fumes, on cheap coffee, and the stubborn pride that had driven her 1,000 miles from home. Now, her body was finally calling her bluff. The small town of Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming, was supposed to be a sanctuary, an escape from the gilded cage of Boston society, from the shame that clung to her family name like a shroud. In the spring of 1878, it had seemed like the edge of the world, a place where she could finally breathe. The school board had been desperate. Their last teacher had run off to California with a sweetheart, leaving 30 children with no one to guide them. Willow had seen the advertisement and seized it. A chance for independence, a way to earn her keep after her father's spectacular ruin and quiet death had left her a pauper in a world that only valued pedigree and wealth. But the reality was brutal. Teaching 30 kids across 8 different grade levels, sweeping the floors, mending the books, all on a salary that barely covered her dreary room and bland board at Mrs. Hatcher's. It had worn her down to a nub. The final bell rang, a shrill cry of freedom for the children. But for Willow, it was just a signal that her legs could finally give way. She saw the children off, a weak smile plastered on her face, and then the world tunneled to a pinpoint of light. She felt the rough, splintered wood of the steps scrape her palms as she fell. And then, nothing. A voice cut through the blackness. A deep, steady voice that felt like an anchor in a swirling sea. "Miss? Miss, can you hear me?" Willow's eyelids were leaden weights. She fought to lift them, and when she did, she was staring up at a face carved from the very rock of the mountains around them. A strong jawline dusted with dark stubble. Blue eyes so intense they seemed to hold the sky in them, filled with a startling concern. A mess of dark brown hair fell across his forehead, defiant against his efforts to tame it. "There you are," he said, and the relief in his voice was a palpable thing. "Don't you try to move." It was then she realized she wasn't on the ground. She was being held, cradled in arms as strong as oak branches, against a chest that smelled of leather and horses and the clean scent of sun-baked cotton. Her head was spinning. What happened?" she managed, her voice a dry rasp. "Name's Blake Carson, ma'am," he said, his steps not faltering. "I was at the general store. Saw you go down on the school steps. No one else was about, so I figured I'd best help." Mortification washed over her, a hot, useless wave. A stranger was carrying her through town like a sack of flour. "Please," she whispered, trying to push herself up. "Put me down. I'm just tired." Another wave of dizziness slammed into her, and she fell back against him. Blake let out a sound that was half chuckle, half snort. "Begging your pardon, Miss Evans, but you're about as fine as a one-legged horse in a kicking contest. You're worn to the bone. The doc's out of town till Sunday. I'm taking you to my place till you're steady again." His words barely registered past the fog in her mind. But one thing did. "You know my name?" "Everyone in Cottonwood Creek knows the new schoolteacher," he said, his voice simple and direct. "My sister's boy, Tommy, he's in your class, says you're the best teacher this town's ever seen." A tiny warm ember of pleasure flickered in her chest. Tommy Carson, a bright, quiet boy. "He's excellent with numbers," she murmured. "Gets that from his daddy's side," Blake chuckled softly. "Now you just rest. My ranch ain't far." Arguing was impossible. She had no strength left. Willow surrendered, letting the gentle rocking motion of his stride carry her away. As they left the dusty street of the small town behind, her last thought before the darkness took her again was that no one had held her like this since she was a little girl, and she was terrified by how safe it felt. When she woke for the second time, it was to the scent of wildflowers and clean linen. Sunlight streamed through a simple lace curtain, painting the wooden floor in stripes of gold. She was in a bed, in a room that was plain but meticulously clean. She sat up, and this time, the world only tilted instead of spinning into chaos. "Easy now." Blake's voice came from the doorway. He was holding a tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a cup of tea. "You've been sleeping for a few hours." "I can't impose," she said, the words automatic, drilled into her by a Boston upbringing that felt a lifetime away. "I need to get back to my boarding house. Mrs. Hatcher will worry." "Already sent word," Blake said, setting the tray on a bedside table. "Told her you took a bit of a turn and were recovering out here. My sister Beatrice is just in the next room. Your reputation is safe, if that's what's got you spooked." The relief that flooded her must have been plain on her face, because he gave her a small, crooked smile that changed his entire face, softening the hard lines. "I might be just a rancher, Miss Evans, but I understand propriety. Now you gonna eat? You're thinner than a fence post, and I'm guessing that's half the problem." As if on cue, her stomach let out a ferocious growl. A deep blush crept up her neck. Blake just chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He helped her sit up, arranging pillows behind her back, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man with such calloused hands. The stew smelled like heaven. It tasted even better, rich with beef and vegetables. "Did you make this?" she asked after the first glorious spoonful. "I can boil water without burning the place down," he said with a shrug. "But this is Beatrice's work. She's the real cook in the family." Willow ate, aware of him watching her from a chair he'd pulled near the bed. He was nothing like the cowboys she'd read about in dime novels. His manner was direct, yes, but there was a quiet intelligence in his eyes, a gentleness in his bearing that was completely unexpected. "What brings a lady from Boston all the way out to Wyoming?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were sharp. She nearly choked on her tea. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" He smiled that crooked smile again. "Your accent, for one. And Tommy told me you tell the little ones stories about growing up near the ocean. Wasn't too hard to put the pieces together." She hesitated, the full story a bitter pill she wasn't ready to share. "I needed a new start," she said simply. "My father. There were financial troubles. After he passed, my options were limited. Teaching was a skill I could use to earn my own way." Blake just nodded, his gaze steady, not pushing for more. She was grateful. She couldn't tell this kind stranger about the whispers, the shame, the vulture-like creditors, or the leering gaze of her father's former business partner, a man 30 years her senior, who had offered her marriage as a form of purchase. "Well," Blake said, his voice soft, "Boston's loss is Cottonwood Creek's gain. Those children need someone who gives a damn." Just then, a soft knock came at the door. A woman entered, wiping her hands on an apron. She had the same startling blue eyes as Blake. "Good, you're awake," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "I'm Beatrice Fisher, Blake's sister. How are you feeling, Miss Evans?" "Much better, thank you, and please call me Willow." "Nonsense," Beatrice said, placing a cool, dry hand on Willow's forehead. "You've been working yourself into the ground for our children. It's the least we can do." She then shot her brother a look, a strange, unreadable glint in her eye. "Blake here hardly ever brings company to the ranch. You must be someone special." Blake warned, a faint red creeping up his neck. "I'm just saying," Beatrice continued, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "My brother's been talking about the new schoolteacher for weeks, and now, here you are." "I collapsed," Willow pointed out, feeling her own cheeks grow warm. "It was hardly a social visit." Beatrice laughed, a bright, clear sound. "Of course. Now you eat up. Dr. Willis won't be back till Sunday. You're our guest till then." Willow opened her mouth to protest again, but a wave of exhaustion washed over her. The simple effort of eating and talking had drained her completely. Blake saw it instantly. He stood and took the tray. "Rest now, Willow," he said, using her first name so naturally it startled her. "We can talk more later." As she drifted off to sleep, lulled by the low murmur of their voices from the other room, a tiny, unsettling thought pricked at the edge of her consciousness. He'd been talking about her for weeks. Why? The next time she woke, the room was bathed in the silver light of a full moon. She felt stronger, her mind clear. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, and she drank it down, her thirst a surprise. From the open window, the faint, sweet sound of a guitar drifted on the night air. A sad, wistful melody that seemed to pull at something deep inside her. Curiosity overriding her caution, she wrapped the quilt from the bed around her shoulders and padded to the window. Below, on the porch, Blake sat leaning against a post, a guitar resting in his lap. He wasn't just a rancher, he was an artist. As if he could feel her eyes on him, he looked up. Even in the moonlight, she could see him smile. "You're up." "Feeling much better," she called down softly. "That music, it's beautiful." "An old song my mother taught me," he said, setting the instrument aside. "You hungry? I can warm up some of Bee's stew." Her stomach rumbled its answer, loud enough for him to hear. He chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes. Come on down if you feel steady. Or I can bring a tray up." "I'll come down," she said, suddenly wanting to escape the confines of the sick room, to understand the man who had rescued her. She found her dress draped over a chair, her shoes neatly placed beside it. Someone, Beatrice, she prayed, had loosened her corset. She tidied her hair as best she could. The face in the small mirror was pale and shadowed, but her eyes were clear. She looked like herself again. The house was small, but built with a craftsman's hand. A large central room with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves overflowing with books. Shakespeare, Dickens, philosophy, poetry. This was not the home of an uneducated cowboy. Blake was in the kitchen, adding a log to a cast-iron stove. "Your home is lovely," she said, and she meant it. "Built it myself," he said, and she could hear the quiet pride in his voice. "Took me 3 years, working between cattle drives, worth every splinter." "You built this?" she asked, unable to hide her astonishment. "Had some help with the mainframe," he admitted. "But the rest, this was my project. Kept me from going stir-crazy during the long winters." "Where is your sister?" Willow asked, suddenly realizing they were alone. "Her husband Daniel came and got her after supper. They live a mile or so east." He gestured to a chair at the kitchen table. "Sit down before you fall down." He moved around the small kitchen with an easy, practiced grace, warming stew, slicing thick slabs of bread, and setting out a jar of peaches. It was a comfortable domesticity that felt both strange and deeply alluring. "I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me," she admitted, as he placed a plate in front of her. "Mrs. Hatcher's meals are functional." Blake grinned. "You mean they're terrible?" "Everyone knows Hannah Hatcher could boil water and somehow make it lumpy. People only stay there 'cause they have to." Willow laughed, a real unburdened laugh. "It's not that bad." "It is," he insisted, his eyes twinkling. "Tommy says her scrambled eggs could be used for slingshot ammunition." They talked as she ate. She learned he'd taken over the Triple C ranch after his father passed 5 years ago. He told her funny stories about his ranch hands and a prize bull named Augustus with a penchant for romantic escapades. In turn, she found herself telling him about her students, about little Mary who lisped and brave James who devoured books on science. "You love it," Blake said, his voice soft. "Teaching. It's not just a job to you." I do, she admitted, surprised at the truth of it. It wasn't what I planned for my life, but those children, they deserve a champion. Is that why you were working yourself to death, starving yourself? The question was blunt, but not unkind. She sighed. The school board pays $20 a month. My room and board takes most of that. I've been economizing. You call that economizing, he said, his voice flat. Willow, why didn't you say something? This town, we take care of our own. Pride, she whispered, looking down at her hands. In Boston, we had everything. And then we had nothing. The looks people gave me. The pity. I would rather starve than see that look in anyone's eyes again. He reached across the table, his large calloused hand covering hers. His touch was warm, solid. It sent a jolt right through her. There's a difference between charity and community, Willow. Out here, we help each other because we know our turn could be next. The feeling was electric, unfamiliar. Suitors in Boston had kissed her gloved hand, their touches fleeting and cold. This was different. This was real. Too real. She pulled her hand away, a sudden, sharp awareness of their situation, of the late hour, of their aloneness crashing down on her. It's late, she said, her voice strained. I should get back to my room. Blake's face shuddered, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes before he masked it. He stood up. Of course. You need your rest. I can take you back to town in the morning. Yes, tomorrow would be best, she said, the words sounding stiff and formal to her own ears. I have lessons to prepare for Monday. As she climbed the stairs, a cold knot of regret tightened in her stomach. She had felt something fragile and real begin to form between them in the warm kitchen light, and she had just crushed it. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee. Dressing quickly in yesterday's clothes, she braced herself for an awkward morning. When she came downstairs, Blake was at the stove, his back to her. Good morning, she said quietly. He turned, and the smile he gave her was so warm and genuine that the tension in her shoulders eased. Morning. You look 100% better. Sleep okay? Better than I have in months, she admitted. Your guest bed is a definite improvement on Mrs. Hatcher's. Glad to hear it, he said, gesturing to the table. Breakfast is ready. We can head into town right after, just like you wanted. There was no blame in his voice, but she still felt a pang of regret. What was she so afraid of? A little kindness. On impulse, she said, Actually, if the offer still stands, I was thinking I might stay one more day. You were right. I need my strength for Monday. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun rising over the mountains. It was dazzling. The offer absolutely stands, he said, his voice filled with a new lightness. I'd be glad for the company. The day was a revelation. After a cheerful breakfast, he gave her a tour of the ranch. It was a world away from the manicured parks of Boston. This was a place of work, of life and death, of rugged, untamed beauty. He showed her his prize stallion, Midnight, and the new calves stumbling after their mothers in the pasture. Ever ridden? He asked as they leaned against a fence. Not since I was a girl, and never a Western saddle. I've got a gentle mare named Daisy, who'd be perfect for you, he said. It's a beautiful day to see the country. She agreed, a thrill of excitement running through her. Beatrice had thoughtfully left a simple riding skirt and blouse, and changing out of her stiff teaching dress felt like shedding a skin. When she emerged from the house, the look of open admiration in Blake's eyes made her cheeks burn. Daisy the mare was as gentle as promised. They rode out, leaving the ranch behind, climbing into the rolling hills. The sky was a vast, aching blue, and for the first time in a year, Willow felt her chest expand, free from the weight of her past. They stopped by a creek, and Blake produced a lunch of bread, cheese, and crisp apples from his saddlebags. They sat on a blanket under the shade of cottonwood trees, the only sounds the gurgle of the water and the whisper of the wind. "Why did you stay here?" she asked him. "Why a rancher?" He gazed out at the land, his land. "Never wanted anything else. This place, it gets in your blood, the freedom of it. It's a hard life, but it's an honest one." He turned his intense gaze on her. "Do you miss it, Boston?" "I miss the libraries," she admitted, "but not the rules, not the feeling that I was always being watched, always being judged." She looked at him, at his strong, weathered profile. "You're not what I expected." "Oh? And what did you expect from a Wyoming cowboy?" "Someone rougher, I suppose. Less." "Less what?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Less likely to have a copy of Shakespeare by his bed." Her surprise must have shown on her face. "You saw those? I figured you for someone who would appreciate them." "I do," she said softly. They fell into a comfortable silence, the space between them charged with unspoken things. She watched the way the sun caught the highlights in his hair, the strong column of his throat. He turned and caught her looking, and this time she didn't look away. "Willow," he said, and her name on his lips was a physical touch. "I know we just met, but—" A sudden, violent crack of thunder split the air, making them both jump. While they had been talking, the sky had turned a bruised, angry purple. Fat drops of rain began to fall, then turned into a torrential downpour. "We gotta go!" Blake yelled over the roar of the storm. They scrambled to gather their things, and by the time they were on their horses, they were soaked to the skin. The ride back was a frantic, wild dash against the elements. When they finally burst into the house, they were dripping and laughing, the shared danger having broken down the last of their reserve. Blake built up the fire as she shivered on the hearth. "You need to get out of those wet things," he said, his voice tight with concern. "There's more of Bee's clothes upstairs, and a robe. Go on." She didn't argue. Upstairs, she changed into a dry blouse and skirt, then wrapped herself in Blake's heavy wool robe. It smelled of him, of cedar and smoke, and something uniquely his own. When she came back down, he had 2 steaming mugs of tea waiting. They sat on a small settee he'd pulled close to the fire, huddled together under a blanket. The storm raged outside, but in here there was only warmth and the crackle of the flames. "What were you going to say?" she asked quietly, into the comfortable silence. "Out by the creek." He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious, searching. "I was going to say that I feel like I've known you a whole lot longer than one day, that there's something about you. It feels like coming home." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I feel it too," she whispered. "It makes no sense. We're from different worlds." "Are we?" he asked, his voice low. "Or are we just 2 people who believe in hard work and honesty and looking out for others? Is that so different?" He was right. In the ways that mattered, they weren't different at all. "I'd like to court you, Willow Evans," he said, his voice formal, but his eyes blazing with intensity. "Properly. I want to show you that a life out here, that I could be worthy of you." "You carried me when I couldn't stand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You fed me, sheltered me. You asked for nothing. You've already proven your worth, Blake Carson." His gaze dropped to her lips. She leaned in, drawn by an invisible thread. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning. Then it deepened, a flood of feeling so powerful it left her breathless. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights and a future she hadn't dared to dream of. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that," he breathed, "since the first moment you opened your eyes." The next morning, Blake drove her back to town. The world was washed clean, sparkling after the storm. As they neared Cottonwood Creek, a strange reluctance filled her. The thought of returning to her lonely room at Mrs. Hatcher's was unbearable. "I'll call on you Saturday," Blake said, sensing her mood. "We'll have dinner at the hotel, if you'll have me." "I'd like that very much," she said, a real smile blooming on her face. When they pulled up to the boarding house, the town was stirring. Eyes followed them. Whispers started behind cupped hands. Mrs. Hatcher's face was a pinched curtain of disapproval in the window. "I believe we're causing a scandal," Willow murmured. "Let 'em talk," Blake said, grinning as he helped her down. "Gives 'em something to do." He held her hand a moment too long, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Until Saturday, Miss Evans." She watched him drive away, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the sun. Let them talk indeed. The weeks that followed were a dream. Blake was a steadfast, honorable suitor. He brought supplies to the schoolhouse, not just for her, but for the children. He fixed the leaky roof, donated books, and became a quiet, constant presence in her life. She, in turn, was drawn into the life of the town. She learned the names of her students' parents, attended church socials, and felt herself becoming a part of the community's fabric. One crisp November night, after a Thanksgiving feast at the ranch with his entire boisterous family, Blake asked her to walk with him. He led her to the same spot by the creek where they'd had their first picnic. Under a canopy of brilliant stars, he dropped to one knee. "Willow Evans," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you the second I picked you up off those steps. Will you do me the honor of being my wife?" Tears streamed down her face as she gave him the only answer her heart would allow. Yes. Oh, yes. They were married on Christmas Eve. The whole town turned out. The little church overflowed with well-wishers. Beatrice was her maid of honor, and little Tommy, beaming with pride, was the ring-bearer. Life at the Triple C Ranch was everything she never knew she wanted. It was hard work, but it was shared work. It was a life filled with love, and soon, with the laughter of their own children. They had twin girls with their father's blue eyes, and 2 years later, a son with Willow's quiet determination. But sometimes, late at night, when the children were sleeping and the house was quiet, a shadow would cross Willow's heart. A lingering echo of the shame from Boston. She had told Blake the simple version of her story, the tale of financial ruin. But she'd never told him the whole truth. She'd never told him about the men her father had been involved with. Dangerous men, men who didn't forget debts. She had run to Wyoming to disappear, but a part of her always feared that the past wasn't finished with her. One afternoon, a stranger rode into town. He was dressed in fine city clothes that looked out of place against the dusty backdrop of Cottonwood Creek. He asked questions at the general store, questions about the new schoolteacher who had arrived last spring. The store owner, a friend of the Carsons, sent his boy riding hard for the Triple C. Blake met the boy on the road. When he heard the news, his face became a mask of cold fury. He turned his horse and galloped back to the ranch, his expression darker than any storm cloud Willow had ever seen. He found her in the kitchen, humming as she kneaded dough for the evening's bread. "Willow," he said, his voice tight. "We have to talk." He told her about the stranger, about the questions. And as he spoke, the color drained from her face. The old fear, the one she had kept locked away for so long, came roaring back. "They found me," she whispered, her hands covered in flour, her body trembling. "Who, Willow?" Blake asked, his hands gripping her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Who found you?" So she told him. She told him everything. About her father's secret partners, the criminals who had used his firm to launder their money. About the threats they had made after he died, convinced he had hidden a fortune from them. She had told them she knew nothing, but they hadn't believed her. She had fled in the night, with nothing but a few dollars and the clothes on her back. "They think I know where the money is," she finished, her voice breaking. "But there is no money, Blake. My father lost everything." Blake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I believe you," he said fiercely, "and I won't let them touch you. This is your home now. You are my wife. No one will harm you here." But that night, as they lay in bed, Willow saw him staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. He thought she was asleep, but she was wide awake, her mind racing. She saw him rise quietly, dress in the dark, and retrieve a heavy pistol from a locked box under their bed. He checked the load, his movements precise and familiar. Then he went outside to sit on the porch, a silent sentinel watching the road. And in that moment, a chilling thought struck her. Her gentle, kind rancher, the man who played guitar and quoted Shakespeare. He moved with the cold efficiency of a man who was no stranger to violence. Who was Blake Carson, really? The man who had saved her was now a mystery, and she realized with a jolt of terror that she might not have escaped her past at all. She might have run right into a different, more dangerous cage. The next few days were a quiet agony. Blake was a shadow of himself. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by a grim watchfulness. He never left her side, his hand always resting near the pistol tucked into his belt. The stranger from the city, a man named Mr. Thorne, had taken a room at the hotel. He was polite, charming even, but his eyes were cold, like chips of ice. He made no move, just watched, his presence a poison seeping into the town's peaceful atmosphere. Willow felt like a bird in a snare, the wire pulling tighter with every passing day. The townsfolk were different too. Their friendly greetings were now tinged with a nervous pity. They looked at her as if she were already a ghost. One evening, Beatrice came to visit, her face etched with worry. "You have to be careful, Willow," she said in a low voice, while Blake was out checking the livestock. "Thorne is not a patient man." "What do you know about him?" Willow pressed. Beatrice hesitated, her gaze shifting. "Just stories. Blake has a past, Willow. Things from before he settled here. He came to Wyoming to start over, just like you. The evasion was worse than any confession." "A past? What kind of past involved men like Thorne?" The fear in Willow's heart began to curdle into a dark suspicion. Blake had known she was from Boston. He'd known her name. He had been talking about her for weeks before she collapsed. Was it possible? Could their meeting have been arranged? The thought was so monstrous, she tried to shove it away, but it took root, a thorny vine twisting around her heart. That night she couldn't sleep. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the bedroom. Blake lay beside her, his breathing deep and even, but she knew he was not truly asleep. Driven by a desperate need for answers, she slipped out of bed. She knew about the old locked trunk in the attic. Blake had told her it held his parents' things, too painful to look through. Now she wondered what else it might hold. The attic was dusty and silent. Moonlight streamed through a single round window, illuminating stacks of forgotten furniture. The trunk was in the corner, heavy and bound with iron straps. She found a crowbar and a box of old tools and pried the lock open. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lifted the heavy lid. It was not filled with old clothes and keepsakes. On top lay a leather satchel. Inside were bundles of letters, tied with ribbon. Her letters. The letters she had written to her best friend in Boston before she fled. Letters detailing her father's ruin, her fears, her desperate plan to escape to the West. How had he gotten them? Under the letters was a folder. She opened it, her hands trembling. It contained a detailed report, written in a precise hand. A report on her, her habits, her friends, her financial situation. It was a hunter's dossier on his prey. And at the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of wanted posters. The top one was for Silas the Vulture Vance, one of her father's most ruthless partners, the man who had personally threatened her. But it wasn't the poster that made her gasp, a strangled cry of horror catching in her throat. It was the face staring back at her, a younger, harder version, but unmistakably the same man, the man she had married, the man lying in her bed. Blake Carson did not exist. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. She stumbled back, hitting a stack of boxes, the noise echoing in the silent house. She had to run. Now. She scrambled down the attic ladder, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She grabbed a coat, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the buttons. She had to get to the children. She ran to their room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She would scoop them up and run into the night, anywhere. But their beds were empty. A cold, absolute dread washed over her. She turned, and he was standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. He was no longer the kind rancher. His face was a cold, hard mask. The gentle blue of his eyes had turned to steel. "Looking for them, Willow?" he asked, his voice a low, chilling purr. It wasn't Blake's voice. It was the voice of a predator. "They're safe. With Beatrice." "Who are you?" she whispered, the words barely audible. He stepped into the room, and the moonlight caught the cruel line of his mouth. "You know who I am. You've known my name for years, Silas Vance." It couldn't be. The monster from her past, the man who haunted her nightmares, was her husband, the father of her children. "The collapse," she stammered. "Was a gift," he said, taking another step closer. "Sped things up. I had been waiting for the right moment to introduce myself. I orchestrated the job opening. I had your letters intercepted. I've been planning this for a very long time, Willow. From the first moment I saw you at that ridiculous Boston charity ball, I knew I had to have you." "The money," she choked out. "You want the money." He laughed, a sound devoid of all warmth. "The money? Your father was a fool. There is no money. I have more wealth than you could ever imagine. I didn't want your father's scraps. I wanted his treasure. I wanted you." He reached for her, and she flinched away, pure revulsion coursing through her. "Beatrice. My sister, in every way that matters. Not by blood, no. By loyalty. She has been with me for years. The entire world, her entire life for the past 3 years, was a lie. The kind neighbors, the welcoming town, the loving family. All of it. A stage. A meticulously crafted prison." "And Thorne?" she asked, her mind desperately searching for a way out. "An old associate," Silas said with a dismissive wave. "He's become a problem. Too greedy. He actually believes the stories about your father's hidden fortune. He followed you here. An unfortunate complication, but one I will deal with. He was a monster, and she had invited him into her life, into her heart, into her bed. She had borne his children. The thought made her want to retch. She backed away, her eyes darting around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape. He saw the look in her eye and smiled. "There's nowhere to run, my love. You belong to me. You always have." Just as he lunged for her, the front door of the house crashed open. "Vance, it's over," a man's voice yelled. Silas froze, his face contorting in a mask of pure rage. He spun around, pulling the pistol from his belt. From the doorway, Mr. Thorne appeared, a revolver in his hand. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 2 other men, their faces grim, their guns also raised, and behind them all, holding a lantern high, was Beatrice. But her face was not the face of a loyal sister. It was the face of a woman, filled with cold, hard fury. And beside her stood a man Willow had only seen once, at the wedding. Beatrice's quiet husband, Daniel Fisher. He was holding a rifle, and it was aimed directly at Silas's heart. "What is this?" Silas snarled, his eyes darting between Thorn and Beatrice. "Betrayal?" "Justice," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with emotion. "For my real brother, the one you murdered 15 years ago to take over his business." The world tilted again. Beatrice wasn't his sister. She was his enemy. "And you," Silas sneered, his gaze locking on Thorn. "I should have killed you years ago." "You should have," Thorn agreed, his own gun steady. "But you were too busy playing house. I got tired of waiting for my share of the money you stole from Evans. So I made a new deal." "A deal with who?" Silas demanded. "With him," Beatrice said, nodding toward her husband. "Daniel Fisher, Pinkerton Detective Agency." Daniel stepped forward, the rifle never wavering. "We've been hunting you for a decade, Vance. You were a ghost, until you got obsessed with a girl from Boston. You got sloppy. Your obsession was your weakness, and we used it." It all clicked into place. The pity in the townspeople's eyes. It wasn't for her. It was for the part she was playing, unknowingly, in their trap. They had all been in on it. Protecting her, watching over her, waiting for the net to close. "Willow was the bait," Daniel said, his voice flat. "We knew you'd come for her. We just had to wait for you to show your hand." Silas stared at Willow, a look of pure possessive madness in his eyes. "She is mine!" he roared, and he did something no one expected. He didn't fire at the detectives. He turned the gun on himself. But before he could pull the trigger, Willow acted. Fueled by years of repressed fear and a sudden volcanic eruption of rage, she grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. With a scream that tore from the very depths of her soul, she swung it with all her might, striking his arm. The gun clattered to the floor. The detective surged forward, tackling him, binding his hands. It was over. The monster was caged. Willow stood, panting, the heavy poker in her hand, her body trembling not with fear, but with a terrible, liberating strength. Beatrice rushed to her, wrapping her in her arms. "I'm so sorry, Willow," she sobbed. "We had to be sure. We had to wait until he felt safe enough to bring his men here. Thorn was our way in." Willow looked at the woman who had been her sister-in-law, her friend. A woman who had been playing a part for years, driven by a quest for vengeance. She looked at the man being dragged away, the stranger who was the father of her children. Her entire life was a lie. But for the first time since she'd left Boston, she was finally, truly, free. The aftermath was a quiet storm. The town of Cottonwood Creek breathed a collective sigh of relief. The secret they had carried for 3 years was finally out in the open. They had all been part of the elaborate deception orchestrated by Pinkerton detective Daniel Fisher and his wife, Beatrice. They had welcomed Willow, protected her from the shadows, all while using her as the linchpin in their plan to capture one of the country's most wanted criminals. Silas Vance, her husband, Blake, was taken away in irons, destined for a federal prison from which he would never emerge. His men, including the duplicitous Mr. Thorne, who had cut a deal for a lesser sentence, were rounded up. The Triple C Ranch, a place built on lies and obsession, was seized by the government. Willow was left with the rubble of her life, and her children, the twins, Sarah and Emily, and little Matthew. They were the innocent fruit of a poisonous tree. How could she ever explain to them who their father truly was? Daniel and Beatrice offered her a way out, a new life, a new name, funded by the Pinkerton Agency. "We can relocate you," Daniel said, his face kind. "Somewhere no one will ever know the story. You and the children can start over, completely fresh. Willow considered it. The thought of escaping the whispers, the stares, the history was tempting. She could go to California or Oregon. She could become someone else entirely. But as she stood on the steps of the schoolhouse, the place where her nightmare had, in a strange way, begun, she watched her students pour out at the end of the day. They ran to her, their faces bright and open, their love for her unconditional. Tommy Carson, Beatrice's son, shyly handed her a wildflower. They didn't see her as a victim, or a fool, or the wife of a monster. They saw her as Miss Evans, their teacher. This town hadn't just been her prison, it had been her protector. These people who had participated in a lie to save her were her community. Running had been her first instinct when she fled Boston. She wouldn't run again. "Thank you," she told Daniel, her voice clear and strong. "But I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." She sold the few pieces of jewelry Silas had given her, the last vestiges of her false life. With the money, and a loan from the town bank, co-signed by nearly everyone in Cottonwood Creek, she bought a small house at the edge of town. It wasn't a grand ranch house, but it was hers. She continued to teach. She poured her heart into her students, finding solace in their progress, in their simple, honest view of the world. She raised her children with love and truth. She told them that their father was a man who had made terrible choices, but that those choices did not define them. She taught them that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that strength wasn't about the absence of fear, but about facing it head on. Years passed. The story of Silas Vance and the brave schoolteacher became a local legend. Willow Evans became Willow Carson no more. She was simply Willow, a pillar of the community, respected and loved. She never remarried. Her heart, she felt, had seen enough turmoil for one lifetime. Her life was her children, her students, and the town that had saved her. Sometimes on quiet evenings, she would sit on her small porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. She would remember the man with the intense blue eyes who had carried her in his arms, the man who played guitar and quoted Shakespeare. She would mourn the dream he had sold her, the love she had thought was real. But then she would look at the lights twinkling in the windows of her small house, hear the sound of her children laughing inside, and she would feel a profound sense of peace. He had built her a cage, but in doing so, he had shown her the true meaning of freedom. He had collapsed her world, but from the ruins, she had built a life that was honest and strong and entirely her own. She had survived. What do you think? Does a person's beginning define their end? Or can we build a new life from the ashes of a broken one? If you believe in the power of resilience, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories of survival and redemption.